We're on chapter 19 of 2 Samuel, and chapter 19 is kind of an interesting chapter in itself because David, in his return back to Jerusalem, is preceded with a sharp rebuke from Joab, and David, I think, finally comes to his senses to a certain degree about what his actions have caused the nation of Israel and what they could cause if he continued to prolong his mourning over his son to the extent that it was just totally consuming his life. And as he goes back to Jerusalem, we see the encounter that he has with 3 or 4 people. And then finally we see I don't know any other way to say it, but sibling squabbling over who's going to have the king. And when I say siblings, we're talking about the 12 tribes of Israel arguing with each other. So as we get started, 2 Samuel 19 has quite a list of characters. And the people that we see in Mahanaim, we have Joab, which was David's, as we'll see, his former captain. Then we have Zadok the priest and Abiathar, and Amasa, which was David's nephew, and was replaced Joab as the commander of the army. Then, on the way back from Jerusalem, he's met with Shimei, and we remember who Shimei was. He was the one that threw rocks at David and cursed him all the way until he got tired of following him. And they said that there was 1,000 men from Judah that was with him. Then we have Abishai, Ziba, Mephibosheth, Ziba and his 15 sons and 20 servants, Mephibosheth, Barzillai, the Gittite, and Shimham, which could be the son of Barzillai. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And then the places of interest in the context is Mahanaim, which was where David was at, and then the River Jordan, which he crosses, and then Gilgal. Now that's another interesting city because I'm not really sure where that was located. And then incidental places, we have the Huram, territory of Benjamin, Rogelim, Judah, Israel, and Jerusalem. These are places that are mentioned in passing. But the main context is Mahanaim, crossing over the River Jordan and going into Gilgal, and finally Jerusalem, where David winds up. So in this particular chapter, we see pardons, honors that are given, and judgments that are made by David as he makes his journey. We see Shimei for cursing David when he's fled. We see that David pardons him over that. Then we see honors that was given. Amasa was given the command of the army instead of Joab. And it's still an interesting concept of why he did that. And then Barzillai for providing the king with supplies. And then the judgments that was made between Mephibosheth and Ziba, that comes up again. So we'll see the result of that. The chapter synopsis, 4 or 5 things. First 4 verses, we see David grieving for his sons and the effect it has on the people. Joab rebukes David for disregarding the nation's sacrifice in the war. And then we see the national dispute over the return of the king. And then David's return back to Jerusalem and those that met him on the journey and the pardons and honors given. And eventually the quarrel between Judah and Israel about the king. Now, David Pratt gave us, I thought, a real good synopsis of what this chapter is as far as his introductory thoughts. He says the whole point of this chapter appears to be to describe the efforts of various people to gain favor with David, especially among those who had become alienated from him because of the rebellion. And that's basically what the whole chapter is about. They see that David is finally being returned as a king, and now everybody is trying to get back into favor with David. It's kind of interesting that how wishy-washy some people can be. When whoever's in power, you go that direction, then whoever's coming back into power, you go back that direction. And it seems like nobody has the integrity to, I say not everybody, but there's a lot of people that doesn't have the integrity of character to do what is right and stay with the individual that God has appointed to be king. Now, I forgot my little pointer, but you should be able to see this. There's 2 places that I found, actually 3, but I felt like these 2 may best describe the location of Gilgal. But at the top of the chart, we see Mahanaim, and then Jerusalem down at the bottom. And there's about 65 miles, and I think that's as the crow flies. But as they were to travel down the plain and then cross over through the River Jordan down towards the top of the Dead Sea, they come through two possible places of Gilgal. One's in the plain area, and then one's between it and Jerusalem. And this could be the location of where some of these events take place. So this is kind of the track that they may have followed. Now, let's take a look at the chapter. Now, as we begin this chapter, it says that Joab had was told that, behold, the king is weeping and he's mourning and he's just terribly upset for his son Absalom. And as we ended chapter 18, he said, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died in your place, oh Absalom, my son, my son." He was in deep grievance over this. And this disturbed Joab quite a bit, because Joab understood that if he was totally consumed with the death of his child and not understand the events that had happened that affected the nation, David stood to lose the support of the nation altogether, and there would be total chaos in the nation, as they would not have a king that the people could look up to. So Joab does, again, some damage control for David for the benefit of the nation, and maybe some self-serving there too, because Joab doesn't do anything, I think, unless it benefits Joab in the long run. But he also understood that if David fell again, then so would he. He said, "Behold, the king is weeping and mourning for Absalom, so the victory of the day is turning into mourning for all the people. For the people heard it and said that day, the king is grieved for his son, and the people stole back into the city as people who were ashamed steal away when they flee in battle. But the king covered his face and he cried out with a loud voice, oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, my son Absalom." You see, the people had fought a great battle for David against unsurmountable odds. And David, instead of showing his gratitude for these people putting life and limb and their very lives on the line for the benefit of the nation, all he could think about was his loss and not the loss of the people. Now, granted, if you lose a son or a daughter, I mean, it's devastating. If I lost one of my kids, it'd probably tear me up for the rest of my life, especially if it was one of my grandsons. But we have to understand too that in death, there is life that needs to be considered. And David was not considering the needs of the people. He was not giving them thanks for what they had done. He was not considering the losses, the injuries that had been incurred. All David could think about was the loss of Absalom. And in Joab's mind, the loss of Absalom should not be considered that great, because Absalom, as we had seen, not only created division among the nation, he brought disgrace upon his family with what he did with his father's concubines, and then he tried to kill his own father and usurp the throne from him. He did a lot of damage to David and his family, and Absalom could not see why he should be exonerated as David was trying to exonerate him. So David comes to the house of the king, and he gives him a pretty good rebuke, and it's really a justifiable rebuke. He says, "Today you have disgraced all your servants who today have saved your life and the lives of your sons and your daughters and the lives of your wives and the lives of your concubines, and that you love your enemies and you hate your friends." This is what the bulk of what Joab is trying to say. He's saying you would rather have your enemies die, your friends to die so that your enemies could live by what you are currently doing by grieving over your son and the loss that he's given it to you. You hate your friends, you love your enemies. For you have declared today that you regard neither princes nor servants, for today I perceive that if Absalom had lived and all of us had died today, that you would have pleased you well. In other words, if you would have lost this battle and everybody that has stood up for you were to have died, so that this worthless man, so to speak, could live, where is your sense of good judgment? Where is your sense of gratitude for the people? He pretty much tells David, you need to get your your thinking straight and get your life straight and understand what these people have done for you. He says, therefore, get up, speak to comfort to your servants, for I swear by the Lord, if you do not go out, not one will stay with you this night, and it will be worse than all the evil that has befallen you from your youth until now. In other words, if you don't stop what you're doing and get out and show your appreciation to the people, they're going to abandon you. You're going to be worthless in the sight of the people of Israel, and you will have done a great disservice to the people. They're going to abandon you. They're going to leave you. And at the same time, I think what Joab is saying to David is, if you don't realize that you need to stand up for what is right, then you have, in essence, shown the people that evil should reign over Israel and not the justice of God. In other words, God is not working through you. And you're not worthy to be the king that he has anointed you to be. Pretty much like Saul. Saul tried to go against God's decisions, and if you allow this to continue, then you yourself, by your actions, will go against what God has decided that you should do. Now, I think it kind of struck David that he needed to do something. So he got up, went to the gate, and told all the people, saying, there the king sits at the gate, and everyone that had fled had come to the gate, and they were all around David. Now, the people were disputing. They said that all the tribes of Israel saying the king saved us and delivered us from the hand of the Philistines. Now he's fled from the hand of Absalom, but now Absalom, whom he noted as king, has died in battle. Therefore, why do you say nothing about bringing back the king? In other words, you don't have a king, you have no leader, you're without any type of leadership. Why not look to David, even though he has fallen and has been chased out of his throne? He is still a king. Bring back the king. Why haven't you done this? So David told the priest to go to the elders of Judah, saying, why are you the last to bring back the king? Now, the 10 tribes of Israel was the ones that were saying, we need to bring back the king. Now, David sends the priest back to Judah and say, why are you the last of the tribes to request that I come back? Are you not my brother? In other words, are you not the family that I came from? Why are you the last to bring back the king? And say to Amasa, are you not my bone and my flesh? God do so to me and to more also if you're not the commander of the army. So David is now beginning to make some changes here. He's realizing that the 10 tribes want David back as king. Now he's trying to get the 2 tribes in the lower part of the country to acknowledge the same thing. Now he's making, I think, a political move here by making Amasa the captain of the army instead of Joab. Now, Joab probably felt like this was a slap in the face. And I don't know why David made this decision. We can probably guess on a couple of events here. First of all, he's probably tired of Joab chastising him, and probably thought that Joab, we needed a change in the army. But at the same time, since Amasa led the army of Absalom and the people fell underneath Amasa and fought for him, it would probably be a good thing to keep him in that position so that the army would continue to follow David under his leadership. Now, you may say, why would a person continue to do that? And it may be, like I said, for a political gamble here. When I think back to the Civil War of the United States, it was a devastating war. It was just, the death was phenomenal. And when there was total destruction and when the Southern Army was finally conquered, the northern states realized that in order to bring the southern states back into the Union, they have to allow them to have some kind of dignity. So they allowed them to honor their leaders by putting up monuments and statues and what have you. And it served its purpose in that day because even though they were defeated, they still maintained their sense of honor and their sense of self-worth. Now today there's a lot of discussion about these things need to be torn down, which probably they need to. Move them to a museum, whatever you want to do with them. but at the time they served a purpose. And I think that Amasa David's move of Amasa to the captain of the army served its purpose in that respect, so that he could keep the army united underneath him. And I don't think Joab liked this, because we'll see that Joab eliminates Amasa in the coming chapters. Now, so he swayed the hearts of all the men of Judah, just as the hearts of one man. So they sent word to the king, return you and all your servants. So that was now the return of the king. So the king returned, came to the Jordan, and Judah came to Gilgal to meet the king there and to escort him across the Jordan. First one to meet him was Shimei. And of course, we know what Shimei did. He threw rocks at David and cursed him and what have you. And he was the first one that probably pushed his way to the front of the crowd to get to David. And when he came to David, he fell down before the king, and then he said, do not let my Lord impute iniquity upon me, or remember what wrong your servant did on the day that my Lord the king left Jerusalem. That the king should take it to heart, for I your servant know that I have sinned. Therefore here I am, the first to come today of all, the house of Joseph, to come to meet you before the king. And I think it's interesting. You know, you could say, did he really truly repent of heart, or was he fearful for his life that if he didn't do anything that David was going to take it? We don't know the heart of this man Shimei, but we do know one thing, that what he says rings true. That if you realize that you've sinned, you need to do something about it, whether or not it's because you fear death or because you begin to realize what you actually did. But Shimei realized that he'd sinned. He went to the person that he sinned against, and he begged their forgiveness. Even though he was the king, he could have been just any other individual. But I think that's a lesson that we should all take to heart. Even though we may not be fearing death, we should understand when we sin against someone, we should go against them and ask them their forgiveness. And Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, which was Joab's brother, if you remember, he was ready to put the man to death. He said, because he cursed the Lord's anointed. You know, this man's worthy to death. David said, you're nothing more than an adversary to me this day. You know, there's been enough killing in this nation. We have to heal ourselves. We have to come together united. To continue to put people to death because of these things, you're an adversary to me. He will not die today. In fact, Shimei was allowed to live throughout the life of David. And when, upon David's close to his end of life, and when Solomon took the reign of the kingdom, David told Solomon to deal with Shimei as he saw fit. And for Solomon's, I guess, good gestures, he allowed, we'll probably see later, if we get to the last lesson, I hope to be able to do a kind of summing up of this. Solomon allowed Shimei to live under certain conditions, and that existed until Shimei violated those conditions, and then Solomon had him put to death. But anyway, that's jumping ahead of the story. Then the second person that came up to him was Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, and he came down to the king, and we could see the situation, or the concern that Mephibosheth had for David's well-being. He said he didn't even care for his feet, trimmed his mustache, or washed his clothes from the day the king departed until the day he returned in peace. In other words, he mourned for the loss of David, or the leaving of David. And when he met the king, David asked him, said, why did you not go with me, Mephibosheth? When I left, why did you not leave? Evidently, he remembered what Ziba told him, that Mephibosheth had said, I'm going to stay in Jerusalem because when this is over with, the kingdom's going to be delivered unto me, the rightful heir to the throne, being the grandson of Saul. And he said, and then he answered, and this particular statement, the way he said it, we're not really sure what was meant by it, but he said, my Lord, O king, my servant deceived me. And he said, my king, my Lord, O king, my servant deceived me. For your servant said, I will saddle a donkey for myself, and I will ride on it and go to the king, because your servant is lame. And that when you stop and look at that, we're not sure who he's referring to. He says, my servant deceived me. for your servant," whether or not he's talking about Mephibosheth himself or about Ziba. If he's talking about Mephibosheth, he had a consciousness of mind to say, "I will saddle a donkey for myself and I'll ride it to go meet the king." But then Ziba might have, said, "I'll take care of it," and then took off himself. Or it may be that Ziba said, "Forget it, I'm the one that's going to go and meet the king." We don't know who he's referring to here, and it really doesn't matter. But the thing that he does say is that he has slandered your servant, but my Lord is like an angel, therefore do what is good in your eyes. All my father's house were but dead, all the men before my king, before my Lord the king, yet you set your king among those who eat at your own table. Therefore, what right have I still to cry out any more to the king? I come from a house that was destitute. I had nothing, and you gave me what I have. You've given me the position at your table. And even though I'm in the condition that I am currently in now, what right did I have to ask any more from you? In other words, whatever judgment you make is going to be a righteous judgment because I trust you to do the right thing. And then the king says, "Why do you speak any more of your matters? I have said." Now, he didn't say this before, but when he uses that phrase, "I have said," he's pretty much saying, this is what I'm going to do now. You and Ziba divide the land. So David doesn't seem to take into consideration that Ziba had deceived the king. To him, it was not as important to deal with being deceived by someone for their own benefit, but rather trying to get the nation back together was more important to him. So in his way of thinking was, let them divide the land, go their way, and be what, let them do what they see fit. I got more important things to deal with. So David may have executed a righteous judgment there, but I think it was not a good judgment because of the fact that the king was deceived and he allowed that to go. And maybe he realized that and he thought now is not the time to begin to execute justice upon Ziba, and because now we're trying to do unified things and to treat him with a just manner, like I should have done Shimei. That is not good for the nation at this point. And then Mephibosheth said to the king, "Let him take it all, just as long as the Lord has come back in peace into his own house." Now, we don't know what actually happened or how all of this panned out. We don't know if Mephibosheth continued to eat at David's table or if he continued to have half the land. We just don't know. We just know that. I do know that in the coming chapter, next chapter, the second chapter, Mephibosheth is again spared by David from death. And then we see Barzillai, the Gileadite, coming down from Adullam and went across the Jordan with the king. He was an old man, about 80 years of age, and he was the one that provided the king with provisions. And David wanted him to cross over and go into Jerusalem, and he would take care of him for the rest of his life. And Barzillai said, "No, I'm an old king. I haven't got many years left in me. I don't see very well. I don't hear very well. Things just, I don't take much pleasure in life. I'd be more of a burden to you, as you would have to take care of an old man and not someone that can take care of himself." He says, "Let me return to my own city, my own people, and be buried with my own fathers." But he did say, "Let your servant," down in about verse 37, I think, "let your servant Chimham, let him cross over with the Lord King and do for him what seems good to you." Now, we don't know who this individual is because we're not told further in the Bible about this individual. But Josephus says in his 7th, maybe I should tell you the passage on that if I can find it. Josephus says in book 7, chapter 11, second paragraph, that Chimham was his son. So if that's true, then David took care of his son and not simply just a common servant. And we do know that he was taken care of fairly well, because he's mentioned again over in Jeremiah chapter 41 and verse 17 that it appears that a huge tract of land was given to him near Bethlehem. So David did take care of him according to his word, and he went with him. And he crossed over and went to Jerusalem with him. So he blessed Barzillai, and he returned to his own place. Now the king went on to Gilgal, and with him all the people of Judah escorted the king, and also about half the people of the northern part of the country, of the 10 tribes. Just then all the men of Israel came to the king and said to the king, "Why have your brethren of the men of Judah stolen you away and brought the king?" Here we begin to see the sibling rivalry between the northern nation and the southern nation. When David fled, he went to the northern nation, made his place encampment at Mahanaim, which was, I guess, considered the capital of the nation of Israel, since Ishbosheth was the one, that's where he resided. They wanted to know why he was going back to Jerusalem, since we took care of you in your exile, we protected you, we provided for you, and when it came down to it, we were the first to wanted to accept you as our king. Now, why are you going back to Judah, since they were the ones that had to be prodded to get you to come back? And they were the ones that, or at least Jerusalem was the capital of Absalom that had the insurrection against you. Why are you going back there when we're the ones that took care of you? And that was the argument, I guess you could say, that they began with David. Then verse 42, he says, "All the men of Judah answered the men of Israel, simply because the king is our close relative of ours. He needs to come home to us. He's our king because he's of our people. Why are you angry over this matter? Have we eaten at the king's expense?" In other words, does the king owe us anything because we provided for him? Have we done anything that we require a gift from the king? In other words, what you're saying is that we took care of the king, we provided for him, he needs to come live with us. He owes us. Now the Judeans are saying, well, we haven't done anything, so he doesn't owe us anything, so if he wants to come live among his people, that's the right that he has, and that's the right that he should take advantage of. He says, and all the men of Israel answered the men of Judah, says, "We have 10 shares in the king, therefore we have more right to David." The 10 shares, what they're saying is that we have the 10 tribes, we are bigger than you are. We have the right to the king by I guess, the right of size and number of people. It says, "Why then do you despise us? Why are you not first to advise bringing back to the king?" In other words, you're despising us because we took care of him. We were the one who wanted to bring him back. And now when you're looking at us wanting to try to take care of the king, you despise us for this. And now you want to try to steal him away from us. And yet the words of the men of Judah was fiercer than the words of the men of Israel. Here we have the rivalry going. And this soon leads into another civil war among the nation. It's interesting to see that before the sin that David and Bathsheba committed, the nation of Israel was united. They were prosperous. They had growth. They were feared among the nations. They were respected. And then when God condemned David for him, he said, "Your throne will be forever." He said, "There will be someone from your lineage sitting upon the throne, but the sword will never depart from your house." And we see the decline in David's, I guess, strength as a king. And all of that because of his transgression of God's law, despising what God had done for him. And now God brings judgment upon David, that the sword will never depart from his house. So we see a lot of interesting things here. And it's really pathetic to see how it's turning out. And what lessons can we learn from that? Well, first of all, don't let your griefs or troubles that alienate you from your friends. You know, if you have griefs, don't turn your back on your friends. Don't give them a cold shoulder. Don't let that alienate you from the help that they want to try to give you, or the comfort or the compassion in any way. And also realize that actions do have consequences. If you're like David, want to wallow in your grief and ignore your friends, then your friends will eventually turn away from you, and you will have no one. And then, when you have sinned against a brother, such as Shimei, go and ask forgiveness and make amends. You know, it may be, you may have an underlying motive, but if you understand the true nature of repentance and asking for forgiveness, then you will understand what repentance is for a Christian today, to ask God to forgive them of their sins. And God will forgive you. And if you have a brother that is truly, has the heart of a Christian, he will forgive you if you go and ask forgiveness of your sins. Do not let unjustified arguments turn us against each other. And that's what we see towards the end of it. They were using arguments that were trying to justify themselves, when in reality it was just unjustifiable, because in their efforts to justify themselves, they were proving themselves to be the type of people that really are not true to heart. They want to try to justify themselves by using unjustifiable arguments. And by doing that, you turn yourself against each other. And that should never happen. Anyway, I did all the talking again. I'm not going to give a test, because if I did, I'd probably fail it myself. Anybody have any comments or questions? Or?
Yeah, in verse 24 it says, was Philitheth the son of Saul? Actually, it was Saul's grandson. And Jonathan was his dad.
Right. That's sometimes it's used like that throughout. In fact, when you get over into First Chronicles and you start going through the genealogies, you start seeing that instead of saying grandson, they'll say the son of. And it may be that by saying that, either that individual may show a greater importance than his father to his grandfather, or it may be like in the case of Mephibosheth, he is the remaining son of Saul, or direct lineage of Saul, so he may be referred to as his son, because Saul was the king, and even though Jonathan was a great man, the kingship was that. So the word son is used interchangeably with grandson. That can be confusing. Believe me, it can be confusing.
A lot of people say, well, look, the Bible contradicts itself. No, not really,
Well, it's just the way people talked and
Yeah.
the way they looked at things back then. Their way of life and their mannerisms and their ideologies are a little different from ours today. It's kind of like when you get over into the New Testament and you start looking at the wife of this man, but she's betrothed to him. At what point does she become his wife? The concept of marriage back then is quite different from what we see today. And that can be confusing.
Well, in the New Testament, didn't the Pharisees and all, they say we're sons of Abraham? I mean, they weren't literally
Right.
sons of Abraham.
They were his descendants. And that's kind of like what they're saying here, is that what the Pharisees were trying to do then was justify themselves by being the sons of, or trying to bring their close relationship as they could to Abraham, because they revered Abraham as a great man. And that was their argument, that we're not descendants of, but they were trying to say, I'm the sons of, getting as close to Abraham as they could. So when they make a mention here about Mephibosheth, they were trying to show his importance towards the last king, or the first king of Israel. Anything else? It's an interesting chapter. We see a lot of events happening, and David returning back to Jerusalem, and we see the people trying to catch David before he gets into Jerusalem and make amends with them, and try to get things taken care of. And to my, I guess, for David's benefit, I think he does well in what he's doing. He's trying to get back onto the throne, trying to execute a certain amount of justice, and trying to eliminate any more death and alienation. And towards the end, even though best efforts he could, it all depends upon how people are going to act towards other people. The king may be there, and he may have a certain amount of power, but if the nation itself wants to fight among themselves, there's not anything one man can do to stop it. And he, short of becoming a ruthless killer himself, and David was not going to do that. So, chapter 20, Civil War. Anyway, we'll see. Appreciate y'all's comments and y'all's questions.